Hello, wonderful leader. This is Taaka. Welcome to the Leadership in Africa Redefined, the podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Busara Africa, a Pan-African leadership development firm. In every episode of this podcast, we uncover powerful insights, share real-world experiences, and deliver practical strategies to help you excel as a leader. Subscribe to the show to become the leader you have always wanted to be. Enjoy! Welcome to another episode of Leadership in Africa Redefined, the podcast. And today I'm joined by the none other than Roberto. Hi, Robert. How are you?
Hello, Tak. I'm good. How are you?
Okay, really well.
Good.
Thank you for joining me. So, today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, boundaries. And we have found that boundaries are a wonderful framework for thinking about relationships in the context of leadership. But let me backtrack. I'm going too fast. Let me backtrack and start faster.
Yes.
Robert, how would you define boundaries? Because I know some of our listeners will be like, hey, boundaries, are you talking about the boundary between me and my neighbor? That's a wall I have up there because my neighbor keeps encroaching. So tell us, in the context of leadership and relationships, what do we mean by boundaries?
So, boundaries are basically the limits we put on ourselves and the rules that we put in place to make sure we don't overstep or do things that will go contrary to what we believe or contrary to what should be, So those things that we do to make sure that nobody goes beyond what they are supposed to go towards. So for instance, if I am somebody who is quite patient, it doesn't mean I should allow people to disrespect me. That's something like a boundary. So putting things that will make people not come to that space of disrespect. That's simply the boundary. So to protect your mental health, the mission of an organization, all those things, just to protect yourself and your organization or your team. That is what we mean when we say a boundary in this discussion.
I like that. And so we're thinking of it, I think it's important to recognize we're thinking of it as a fence, not a wall.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's not a firm wall that you have between people, because I think many times when we talk about boundaries in an African context, people are like, please, don't be bringing those things here, or we're separate, because we're very communal as Africans. And it's important for us in that respect. So again, in this conversation, keep in mind we're thinking of something that can be very fluid.
Exactly.
It's a fence that ebbs, but it's something that enables you to protect either your personal space, your team or your organization's space, or even the space within you.
Exactly.
Okay. So with that understanding of boundaries, what we hope to do in this nuts and bolts is talk about 3 critical boundaries you need to master as a leader. And you can think of 3 types of broad boundaries, and the 3 we're going to share with you are in these 3 areas. So the first area of boundaries are actually the boundaries you have with yourself. You actually need your own, because sometimes you need walls, things to be like, as for that Taaka, no more, you can't do that one. So we call them self-boundaries. So that's one big area. We have one that we really want to highlight in that area. The second are the boundaries you have with other people. So in terms of what line people can cross and not cross, and as you lead others, you can imagine that becomes really critical. That's what we call the self-boundaries. That's an area of boundaries and others. And we have our second boundary in that one we really invite you to master. And then the third is really more with the external world. So as you are leading a team or an organization, it's around how do you manage the boundaries between your team and maybe the broader organization that you work in. Or if you're the head of an organization or a company, how do you manage the boundaries between your company and the external world? And we have lots of boundaries to manage, but we want to focus on 3 that we think are really critical. So should I begin?
Yes, please, Taaka.
So Let me start, as I said, one of the biggest areas is, the first area is around self, but my boundary number one is what I'm going to call the mental border control. Everybody's talking about border control in these days with you know who in power. So the mental border control. And what is that? Let me start with the challenge that I experience. And I hope many of you listeners, those watching us, can resonate. There will be times where I have what I call thought attacks, where your mind is just bombarded with negative thoughts. The kinds of thoughts, like, for instance, worrying thoughts, like, oh my gosh, is this thing going to get done on time? Well, you know, I'm traveling up and down, so you know my usual story with visas. It's like, is this person going to issue the visa on time? And will I get my passport back in time to submit it to this other place? And will I get this done? And what if I can't make it with this particular client? And what are they going to... And it's just so, and then if you have children, then you're always worried about them, and then you have a whole bunch of, sometimes my mind just goes in so many directions, 500 miles an hour, worrying about things, just getting anxious about, and some of those things are beyond my control. Now you can imagine, when you're in a leadership role, I imagine for many of you, you will just have your mind thinking about so many things, worrying, turning, and so the first boundary to establish, as we called it, the mental border control, is to not allow those thoughts to take permanent residence in your head. So, you know, they infringe, they come in, just the way, you know, you have those neighbors that cross the wall, come in, and before you know it, they're there. And it's to be able to say, no. I'm not going to indulge this thought. Out you go. So for me, that's the first boundary to manage. And I think part of learning how to do that is first to become aware of when I'm having those thoughts. And sometimes it happens so fast, you're not even, before you know, you're just there, then all of a sudden you start to feel anxious. You start to feel really worried, or you feel all of a sudden extremely short-tempered. So for me, the mindfulness to know that unhelpful, negative, undermining, that's a whole other group of thoughts that come. You know, those ones, the self-doubt ones, the inner critic, and all her friends come to start saying, hey, do you deserve to be here? Maybe you shouldn't be here. You're not that group. The way I notice those people have encroached upon my mental space is through my emotions. So in that sense, my emotions become a gift. They are almost like a gauge on a fuel tank that tells me, not even just the fuel tank gauge, you know, your dashboard on the car tells you when you're overheating, when your tank is down, when lights start popping on my dashboard, that's when I get anxious. So it's the same thing for me with emotions. I start to know, if I'm getting too anxious, if I'm getting very irritable, if I'm getting really worried, all of those are signals to me that I've not managed the mental border control. I have allowed illegal thoughts to cross the border into my head, and they're becoming permanent. And it's time to be still, to think, all right, how do I want to think about this? And you could see just recently I was dealing with one of those issues, and I was, those visa issues. And I was getting so worked up, and I realized, wait a minute, Taaka, it's beyond your control. You've done everything you can. Choose how you want to think about this. You can decide you're going to get so stressed and you're going to entertain all those negative thoughts that have come in, or you can tell those thoughts, there is the fence, there is the gate. Bye-bye. I've seen you. And so I think, to me, that's the practice in terms of that border, the manage. So what helps is meditation. I think the more I meditate in the morning, the more quiet I am within, the more I'm able to capture that. A sense of mindfulness generally during the day. Being attuned, as I said, I love my emotions because I don't judge my emotions. I use them as symptoms, as signals to tell me who is running around in my head, and to decide who remains here, can take permanent residence, and who needs to be evicted or deported out because they don't actually belong within. But what about you in terms of the mental border control?
I think some years ago you shared with me in a leadership program a poem. Do you remember that poem?
Yes, it's the guest house.
Exactly. So as you were talking, I'm like, oh, I remember this poem, which was clearly what you're describing. And it's very true. And I think what some of us have called it maturity.
Yeah.
You know, the sense of being able to identify your emotions and knowing how to regulate them.
Yes.
And knowing which thoughts come in and catching yourself to say, this thought is this I label this thought this way.
Yes.
And I group it in these people. And so this ones I don't identify with them, so I let them out.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Catching yourself being able to do that,
Yes.
you know, is and I love when people see you being able to be in control, you know, of yourself and controlling those things that come your way. I don't know.
The reason you saw me pause when you said the word control, because it's a lot more fluid. I mean, at least I know personally, it's never quite control.
Yeah.
It's being, you know, sometimes I refer to it as being a compassionate witness of what's happening within.
Yeah.
So that as I notice these thoughts, I don't, with lots of judgment, deport them.
Yeah.
I lovingly say, guys, thank you, I've heard you, but you're not helping me today. I need to be on point today. I need to be positive today. I need to be focused today. And all of you who are just focused, you group of thoughts who are just focused on negativity, I love you, but y'all got to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's less control and a lot more of management. Maybe I'll put it
exactly.
that way,
And that is what maybe I was referring to say being able to do that work that you just mentioned. That is
that
it,
work,
you know,
isn't it?
that work to sit through it, you know, because for some people immediately it happens, it must strike, you know.
Yes.
It must strike. It's either I'm acting on it or I'm letting it go. But your ability to sit with it and analyze it and know whether I want to do this. I tell people that when I'm even explaining emotional intelligence, that people think emotional intelligence is identifying bad feelings and letting them go alone. That is emotional intelligence. But the idea of being able to know what is coming, label it, associate it, deciding what to do with it. You know.
Yes, I like that.
You know, because then some people say anger. I'm like, anger is not always negative.
Yes.
It's how you use it.
Yes.
So the work of identifying this is anger, this thought brought it in.
Yes.
This is what does it mean to me at the moment?
Yes.
How do I want to use it now?
Yes.
You know.
That
is what. So I explain to people, look, you can use anger in a positive way. And sometimes in trainings and in discussions, I exemplify to people that you could be stern and maybe because of your anger say something, and the next moment you move to the next thing as if things are moving on as they're supposed to be because you have expressed your anger, you've
let it go.
Then you let it go. So deciding what to do with it, that is that level.
Yeah.
So am I using this to help straighten things, to make things better? Is it going to help? What is the goal of using this feeling or this thought that has come into my head?
But you see, it's interesting. I'm unable to manage those emotions as well until I start with the mind and body control.
Exactly.
Just as you said, I've come to realize that many of these emotions are driven by a bunch of thoughts. And I know it's fairly circular. Then it becomes, but so the better I am able to manage the thoughts. And it's not control. I will never be able to do that. So I don't know, but I still we'll call that first boundary the mental border control.
Yes.
In terms of managing what we entertain and what we don't entertain. So folks, in terms of the first one, we'll say that's the first boundary as a leader to seek to manage. Manage your thoughts. Yes, you do have some level of influence about what thoughts you entertain or don't, because, as Robert has said, your thoughts influence your emotions, your emotions influence your behavior. So if you want to show up as a strong, effective, transformative, loving leader, then you got to get control of those thoughts that contribute to those emotions. So that's my first. So now, if we go to the next broad area, which is managing boundaries with others. The first one was managing yourself and the boundaries within. With others, what is one for you, Robert, that you think most leaders really need to get good at in terms of managing boundaries with others?
I think it is very clear that we need to hold people accountable. And holding people accountable to what we together share as expectations for what we are doing together.
Yes.
So our ability to draw the line and say, these are the ways in which we want to do this together, and this is how, and we don't go beyond this particular line. So the challenge of holding people accountable, especially when we have clear expectations and we have laid them down in rules, in SOPs, in things that have clearly shown and explained how we want to do things here or how we want to do things amongst us.
Yes.
And people are not able to stick to those lines.
Yes.
So as leaders, our ability to manage that line, that expectation, that whatever we may call it, say we can put this in an SOP, so what you standard operating procedures. So because this is how we want to put papers here, we want to speak to each other respectfully, we want to, all those things we must hold people accountable to these things. That is one thing.
But as you're rightly saying, we often struggle with that.
Yeah, we do.
What have you seen people really struggling with in terms of holding people to account?
Holding the conversation.
Yeah, the difficult
conversation. The idea of sitting somebody down to say, you know what, you did this and we are not doing it again.
Yeah.
Finding the space. And it, of course, in our circles is a lot of things around, we've mentioned this in some other podcasts around our relationship, because we see each other as family. So it's difficult to sit someone down and say, look, you crossed the boundary. You didn't deliver on time. You didn't do it in the quality that we expect you to do it in. And so that makes it difficult for people to manage that border, that relationship, that fence, because of that relationship that may exist, Sometimes too, it is the fact that we have the expectations in our heads.
Yes.
But we haven't expressed it clearly to people. So I have an expectation of delivery on this time, but I haven't said it to the person. So now when I'm going to hold the person accountable, say, you've crossed the boundary. What boundary are you talking about?
Yes. Did I say?
Did we agree on any boundary? No.
Or they just don't get it.
They don't get it. They just don't get it. Maybe it's something that we are hoping that they understand because maybe there's a trend, there's a culture, but people are not catching up to the culture. So maybe what is there that we need to do to make sure people catch that line and follow through? That's what I've seen. Yeah.
So I like almost that metaphor you're giving, in terms of relationship with others and a leadership thing, is that your fences, that boundary defines in this company, in this organization, within this team, this is how we do things around here. Yeah. You come on time, you show up professionally, you're honest, you're ethical, you do things you're always respectful. Yeah. It's understanding that. That's the fence. Yeah. Then when you don't do it, you've crossed the line. Exactly. You've gone over. Exactly. And what I hear you saying is that as leaders, we need to be able to manage what happens when people cross the line. Exactly. And this is where you see them struggling because it requires often a difficult conversation.
Yeah. As a leader, making decisions and solving problems can sometimes feel overwhelming. Having a thinking partner to help you reflect, gain clarity, and take charge of your situation is essential for personal and professional growth. This is where coaching comes in. At Busara Africa, we offer executive coaching guided by the ethics of the International Coaching Federation. Our internationally certified coaches bring years of experience and mastery of the coaching process, empowering you to take control of your leadership journey. Contact us today at www.busara-africa.com.
Are you doing too much? Feeling overwhelmed, yet still questioning if you're doing enough? Leading from within, the inner work of leadership is here to help. This monthly online program helps leaders like you build self-awareness, master emotional intelligence, and lead with confidence. With expert-led masterclasses, practical tools, and a curated resource library, you'll gain insights to lead with authenticity and impact on your schedule. So take a breath and join me on a powerful journey of inner work required to thrive and find your joy as a leader. Join now on www.busara-africa.com. But what I also see happening is not only that it requires a difficult conversation, there's a big question on consequences.
Yes.
So what? So then what?
Yeah.
I'll give you a perfect example, and this example is not from an office type situation, because I don't want us on this podcast to act as if leadership is only practiced in organizations, in companies. Sometimes it's in the everyday spaces on this that we live in this continent. Huh? So the other day I went to cut my hair, and when I got to the salon, I knew they opened at 9. And I knew the barber would come at 9, but as you know, my daughter was also braiding her hair. Huh? So the barber showed up around 9:15, but the main receptionist was around, and I said to her, "But I was 9. Where are your people? I don't understand. It's already 9 o'clock." And I could see there were only 1 or 2 staff in there. She goes, "Let me call them." So she started calling. So as I said, the barber finally came around 9:15, 9:20. So, but I noticed the girls who were braiding hair were still not there. So my daughter was still waiting. So I said to the barber, I said, "But it's almost 9:30. Where are your colleagues on a Saturday? You know, that's your busiest day.
Yeah.
Where are your colleagues?" He says, "Oh, they're coming." But in my mind, I was like, and I knew their madame was not around. And I said, "But on a Saturday, why would you?" And he says, "Oh, madame, they come from far. And sometimes they need to take 2 cars. So for audiences, 2 cars, it could mean 2 trotros, 2 taxis, 2 matatus. You know what I mean? We're meaning 2 public transports. So that it takes time. You have to wait. Maybe you have to wait till they fill. And so I thought, that meant these girls rocked up at around 10 to 10. And I thought, in what we're describing here, they've crossed the line. Because I'm sure their madame had told them, if we open at 9, you guys need to be here by 8 to have your breakfast, to settle, to clean up, you know. But they were showing up almost 2 hours later. They've crossed the line. So what does she actually do about them crossing the line? Eventually, one of them actually didn't show up at all. So they were short-staffed all day. So at the end of the day, I met up with the owner, and I said to her, "What happens here? People, they come late, and then I could see you're short-staffed." She says, "It's not easy. It is not easy running a business, managing people on this continent. It's not easy." And I said, "What?" She says, "It's the attitude." And I thought, "Oh, okay." And now talk about again crossing the line. She says, "The one who was supposed to show up just completely didn't show up. She tried calling, he had switched off the phone. So completely unreachable. So left her hanging. So clearly he had crossed the line. So she said when apparently she was coming from the corporate side. So when she first, I guess her passion was hair, running businesses, hair stuff. She said when she started, she was going mad. She would always be shouting at people, and then she would keep firing them, because for her, the consequence of crossing the line was, "You're gone, next, you're gone." So she says, "I kept firing so many people that soon I got tired of firing. So for her, the challenge was, she could hold them accountable, but was finding what is the right consequence, because she felt firing is too far.
Exactly.
But I could see she was struggling with what is the right thing to do with this particular group of employees, with who have a certain relationship to work ethic, but also have a real challenge in terms of, it's not, I'm assuming, it's not that they just want to be late, but they have this challenge of transportation. So how does she support them as well to be able to hold the line? What does she do to ensure that people understand why and the consequences of why if they don't pick the phone, it does a spillover effect on? So I think this thing of holding the line and holding people accountable is usually, again, we say it's not a wall.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a constant, and I'm seeing two things. It's you're constantly having conversations with people because, as you rightly said, expectations may sit in your mind.
Exactly.
People may not appreciate that if you don't pick the phone and you don't come to work, now come and see the backlog with all of us. How does this look on our company? Then we don't get as much business. If we don't get as much business, then you're out of a job. Oh, I can't give you the raise So how do you talk to people to help them appreciate that so that you together manage that boundary? It's not a boundary of ging, ging, ging. I think too many of us we think shouting is what it takes to hold the line. Are there other things you would do to manage that?
I think, yes, the last one you said, which I think we alluded in the first one, is be empathetic, in the process. I mean, with yourself at the beginning, I would say with that, and then also with others, because a clear example is also, I was also in an employment where I was the head of organization. There was a person who was constantly coming late, always late. And then what happened was then I needed to find out. Initially, I was like, we put in a book there, people must register. We even installed a thingy where you have to put your finger and all of those things. But this person constantly still couldn't meet the target, And as we all know, as employers, firing, especially in the formal sector, firing is difficult. It's not easy, especially with the kind of environment we are in. So the best thing to do was to sit with the person and say, how do I support you to come early?
Oh, nice.
Enough. Then she revealed to me, look, I have a new baby, I have another child, my husband tries to take care of the child, but I still have to make sure things are done at home before I come. So then we came to an agreement. So you will come at the days that your husband can take care of the children, you come at a particular time. At the days that he can't make it, you come at a particular time and you close at a particular time. So instead of maybe arriving at 9, you arrive at 10. And then you close at 6 instead of 5, because your husband will take care of the kids at home when you close late, Or do you do extra hours the days that you don't have to take care of the kids when they're on vacation and their grandma, reach an agreement to manage that boundary. And I think that thing also making it clear for others to know.
Yes.
Because if people don't know that this is not a special way of treating someone, but you are managing the lines by being mindful of your context and who you are with, it is key. I mean, especially this idea of working with certain, like you mentioned, a certain group of people in a particular industry.
Yes.
I know there's also a management of a group of people in a cleaning agency that I used to consult for. That is one of the areas that you have a lot of people falling out very fast. Because the pay is little. You do so much work as a cleaner, and then you are supposed to come very early in the morning, So then people keep dropping out, so easily. So being able to manage the lines there around arriving early, doing quality work is challenging. So finding more empathetic ways and being aware of the people you're working with.
And being realistic about how much you can expect.
Exactly, because
you know what I just thought we hadn't thought through, Robert, and that I think it's important to talk. We've talked about holding the line in terms of holding people accountable, in terms of the power dynamics where the person is reporting to you. Sometimes, even as a leader, you're holding the line with somebody more senior to you. It could be your boss, it could be your board chair, but I can imagine even in those instances, it's like saying you've crossed the line either in terms of disrespect or expecting me to do too much.
Exactly.
If you're a high flyer, people just keep dumping stuff on you, giving you stuff to do. So I think there's even something there in that relationship too. And what I'm hearing is communication then becomes a key thing in that boundary management. to be able to even say in the most respectful way to say to somebody that, I'm sorry, I didn't appreciate that comment. Or I feel like the way you are working, the way I'm not feeling respected in the things that you have said.
Yeah, exactly.
Or I'm feeling an overload of work in terms of how much is sitting on my plate. Can we explore ways to share out? Because then you feel like somebody has crossed the boundary and is putting too much. They've thrown all things. So it's almost like boundary management can happen in all directions. It can happen with peers.
Exactly. That's what I was going to go to. I was like, yes, we talk about up, down, up, down, and horizontal as well. 360, because the idea is if you're able to do it in a way that everybody sees that I am responsible for holding the line.
Yes.
Within the team. Yes. Then everybody holds everybody accountable. Everybody holds everyone to the line.
Yes.
So that, for instance, in the case that you gave, if everybody felt empowered enough to hold their colleagues accountable, people would. I'm sure in certain areas where I've gone where people arrive late, and then it is not the boss that is saying people.
Yes, the colleagues.
It's the colleagues, who are calling you to account.
Yes.
We
were here at 8. Why is it you think you can rock up at 10? Yes. We're all here doing it. We're all getting paid the same. Why are you?
So a way of leaders empowering the whole system to hold everyone accountable.
Everybody holding the line.
All of us are holding the line, yes.
Nice one. Yes, all right. Folks, that was the second one, holding the line. And that's again in the interpersonal relationship. The first one was the intrapersonal relationship. That was the inter. So our third and final one in terms of holding the line is really in terms of your boundaries between your organization or company and the external world. Or it could even be your team and the broader team. But let me focus first on your organization. And what I've seen in terms of leaders really struggling with this boundary comes in two ways. One, for those of us who are in the non-for-profit sector, funding has gone from like this, but we always wished it was like this. For those who are just listening, my hands are very big, and now I'm bringing my hands smaller and smaller and smaller. So in other words, the funding pool, the sources of funding, also with the 2025 cut of funding from USAID means the availability of funding across is much smaller.
Exactly.
So the temptation then, in terms of boundary, is that we may initially think that this is what our job is to do in the external world. Our mission is, let's say, is women's empowerment. That's our thing. That's what let me give a better one. Our mission is education. That's what we love. We're passionate about education. Then all of a sudden we find, oh my God, one of the biggest funders in the education sector, USAID, is no longer there. But there's still money for climate change. So we're like, now we're interested in climate change. Maybe we should start thinking about doing some climate justice work. So all of a sudden that boundary of saying, this is our niche, this is our area that we're committed to. We start to do what we call mission drift. And that's not to say your mission shouldn't grow and it shouldn't. But too many times you find people are just chasing the money. Or in business, I think you remember during COVID, when all of a sudden all the businesses went online, delivery. So somebody is all of a sudden selling cups and things and they say, oh, no, now I'm going to delivery service. Is that your niche? Is that your area? So it's almost jumping from wherever there is without, it's like you jump the boundary to do something not related to your strengths, you're interested, but just because you are seeing cha-ching, cha-ching, dollar signs there. So I think that's one boundary, and I call it's a fence. And we're not saying that you can't shift. You can't change your core business or your mission, but it's to be a lot more mindful and intentional as a donor, a client tries to get you to do something that you're like, is this really within my line of business? Is this really what I'm aligned to? It's being able to say, yes, we will consider it, have a word with your board, have a word with your key advisors to say, this we will do, or say, nah, money looks good, but this is not really our cup of tea. What have you seen folks being challenged with in those kinds of situations?
I think maybe also if we could call something vision, what do you call values drift?
Yes.
Where people have clear values in the organization, where they believe they've written it on the walls, they try to teach it to their staff. But because of maybe something like that, because of the mission drift, it could result in a value drift, in the sense of maybe you are excellent and quality in education. Because you've mission drifted, now your excellence in delivering climate change is poor. Because that is not your forte. That is not what you are supposed to be doing. And also just allowing yourself to be pulled left, right, center, because you are not staying to what you believe as an organization to be what's supposed to be. It can come with also maybe you have a value around respect for everyone, and then you have a staff who is a star performer, and because they're a star performer, they start disrespecting people, talking down on people, and as a leader, you look at these things happening because you say, oh, this one baby star, I'm my star, so whatever they do, you either talk it down or you don't respect it. Sometimes you see that happening in organizations as well.
So I think a key thing to be able to do as a respect is make it very clear to stakeholders where you stand. What are we here to do? What's our core mission? What is our core business? What is our unique selling proposition? What's unique about us? What are we committed to? So someone won't be trying to take you in a different direction when they know that you've made visible. You yourselves are clear, but you've made visible to other stakeholders what you stand for, what your mission is, and what your values are. I think that helps with that. Huh? So, colleagues, those are three key areas. Those are three key boundaries we believe are critical for leaders. But even as we think about that, would love to end with some principles to keep in mind as you maintain, because we just mentioned three. You probably will think of so many others in so many of the different areas. Huh? So what would you say are some principles that we should leave our listeners with as they start to think about better boundary management as leaders?
I think the first thing is that better boundary management happens if you're self-aware. If you are very clear on who you are and confident in what you have. So then people, like we always say, there are people who, when they walk in a room, people already know that this one I don't disrespect. This one I don't do this thing to, because of who they are and how they carry themselves. The organizations you never approach with bribery or corruption, because you know that these people, this is who they are, and they clearly define who they are, they behave who they are. So it makes it difficult for anybody to approach them in that sense. There's also the idea of respecting others' boundaries. Being able to be clear. You want your boundaries respected, it's important to be aware of other people's boundaries and respect them. It's very important that we do that. And then finally, don't bury your head in the sand. If you see something happening, please address it immediately as you can before it gets worse.
I like that. So those three principles. So the one, if I'm hearing you say, the first one is be very, the more clear on who you are and what you stand for, the less you have to talk plenty to say, this is my boundary, this is my, people are already like, with Robert, you don't disrespect him.
Exactly.
And that comes from your level of self-confidence, your level of self-worthiness, and that it can be at an individual level, but at an organizational level as well. Your clarity on what you stand for. So that's the first one. Do the inner work. Both individually and organizationally, to know what you stand for. Then the second you are saying is respect. I'm so glad you mentioned respect other people's boundaries, because I think as leaders, often we jump into other people's spaces. We start rescuing people. Who asked you? They can handle it, but we're trying to do things for others and working in disempowering ways. So respect other people's boundaries. And finally, when you see boundary encroachment, don't bury your head in the sand. Deal with it.
I think one clear example that comes to mind, especially with the first one, is I have most people coming, talking to me to say, oh, Robert, I saw you, but I was shy to talk to you, or I felt I felt, oh, I should call you sir. I was like, no, you don't have to. But because of the way you carry yourself, people give you some level of respect.
But are you coming off snobbery in a snobbery way, Robert? That they think they have to call you sir?
It's the level of self-confidence, you know.
Oh, okay.
When you reach in a room and you are like, this is who I am. You have the presence.
Yes.
Then people already accord you certain
certain level of respect. Yes.
So I think that was a clear example. It comes from within, and how you're able to show it. And like you said, if you're an organization, if all your people go anywhere and they behave in certain ways, people associate with your organization.
If they behave in ethical ways, people are like, those ones, we know what to expect from them.
Yeah.
Those professional ones, we know what to expect from them. Don't be asking them for funny things.
Exactly. Yes.
Really nice.
Yes.
So, wonderful listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you have a better understanding of what we mean by boundaries. And most importantly, I hope you're very clear on what those 3 boundaries are you need to manage to be an effective leader. So thank you for joining us. As always, we encourage you to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Share if you found some of these tips useful. And we will see you in the next episode. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Leadership in Africa Redefined, the podcast. I hope you learned a lot. And if you found value in this conversation, share it with a friend and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you would like further support on your leadership journey, please get in touch. You can find us on busara-africa.com. And don't forget to follow Busara Africa on all social media platforms.